Welcome to our lecture tonight. Our speaker has been sort of in a contemplative space. I walked in and he's like, and I'm kind of flying all off the handle here. So I wish I could be a little bit more present, but such is life. But I want to welcome you all to this second, like I said, in our speaker series on cyborg Buddhas and new technologies of awareness. As you know, last semester, many of you were here, we had a series of speakers that talked to us about meditation, Buddhist meditation, Vipassana in particular, the mindfulness boom that is sweeping our nation, and its Burmese origins, as well as its what we call tongue-in-cheek mass manifestations, because a lot of that mindfulness tradition that came out of Burma manifested here in Massachusetts, out of Barre, Massachusetts, the Insight Meditation Society, and then taken out into all kinds of other realms via the John Kabat-Zinn and mindfulness-based stress reduction, and has had many, many places that it's gone since then. This semester, we're going a little bit into some, what I think of is, people don't quite get this, but to me, it's the same place. To my mind, Buddhism has invented, corrupted, co-opted, created all kinds of technologies of awareness over its thousands of years of history. The Shin meditation, the Shin tradition in Japan is not the same as the Tantric tradition in Tibet. It's not the same as many other places. And all of these kinds of things have been in the service of human awakening and moving forward, moving on. And so, go figure, here we are today. we have new things. We have new people. We have new kinds of things that are going on. And it's interesting to me, I find a little bit of reaction against some of the new technologies of awareness. Sometimes technology sounds like a foreign term to people. It seems like it involves computers or wires or something like that. But to me, it's kind of all part of the same. So tonight's speaker, Mikey Siegel, comes to us from California. He has all kinds of very interesting backgrounds. He's part of the Buddhist Geeks movement. I don't know if you folks know about that, Buddhist Geeks. It's an interesting movement of people who are looking at ways in which Buddhist meditation and Buddhist technologies are able to be adapted to what we're doing today. He's the founder of the consciousness hacking movement. Who doesn't want to do that, right? Who doesn't want to hack their consciousness? He has all kinds of fun backgrounds and fun stuff he does. We had dinner last night together, and MIT Media Lab goes back into his background. Robotics goes back into his background. Cybernetic alligator pizzas, which are some kind of social eating phenomenon.
It was a cake, not a pizza.
It was a cake.
Okay, it's very different, very different.
Okay, you can ask him about this later. And many other kinds of backgrounds in, sort of hardware and software kinds of software. And by software, I mean our humanware, our wetware, like who we are and where we come from. And the Media Lab is part of it. His robotics experience is part of this. And he has an overall interest in, I'm going to quote from him here, creating tools that facilitate people's own path towards higher consciousness, self-realization, awakening, however it is you might describe the experience of transcendence. Thanks for coming.
Cool. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you. That was a great intro, specifically because you really set the stage for what I'm going to talk about in a positive way. So thank you for that. So hey everyone, it's great to be with all of you. This is a wonderful, intimate setting. I don't need a microphone. I can just speak directly to you. So this is really nice. I'm gonna jump right in here. I realize I never made a first official title slide, so it just jumps right in. So I'll begin sort of with my story a little bit and kind of how I came to this. I think it helps to contextualize things a little bit. I'm actually going to move this table because I'm a frantic pacer when I'm giving talks. I could just knock it over. As Jamie said, my formal sort of educational background and my graduate work was all in robotics, but more specifically, really thinking about how we can shift or totally rethink the relationship between humans and technology. So you can see here, these are what you would call social robots. And so in this context, I was thinking about how you can take a technology and really give it this anthropomorphic form to allow a new type of social relationship. And I didn't realize it at the time, but much later on, about 4 or 5 years later, I would begin to actually focus on an entirely new and different way that people could be relating to technology. So after finishing my graduate work, I was in an incredibly fortunate situation that I think very few people actually find themselves in, which is where I basically had checked everything off my list. I had the good job, I had the great friends, I was living in San Francisco. There was really nothing I could point to say this is the cause of my unhappiness. Yet, the true fortune in that is that I realized that I was still discontent. I was still somehow at a deep level dissatisfied. And I realized at that point that that dissatisfaction was actually deeper than the conditions around me. It was deeper than having the right job or the right life circumstances. And so at that point, I essentially quit my job in search of how to find this deeper sense of satisfaction, this deeper sense of contentment and peace with life. And so I went kind of on the vision quest. I went through India, I went to ashrams, I explored Buddhist approaches and yogic approaches, non-dual approaches, Advaita approaches across the board. Really, this was a few years of searching. It continues to this day. I'm an active explorer of my own experience. But it kind of came to a head on a meditation retreat. I'm sure many of you have been maybe on a Vipassana retreat. It was a 10-day retreat, about 14 hours a day of meditation. And the style of meditation that we were doing was really a non-judgmental awareness of the body and the sensations and the experience. And there were lots of sensations. So my legs were killing me, my back was killing me. It was an incredibly unpleasant situation sitting there. I think it was maybe on the 7th day. And something happened. The pain didn't go away, the discomfort didn't go away, but all of a sudden everything was actually okay. There wasn't a shift in the quality of my experience or the content of my experience, but there was a dramatic difference in my relationship to that experience. There was the level of judgment, the level of dissatisfaction, the level of resistance to what was happening had somehow fallen out. And it wasn't sort of a mystical kind of, psychedelic experience. It was an incredibly grounded, incredibly lucid, incredibly clear experience that lasted for quite a while. And so this really gave me a hands-on, first-person realization of the potential for human experience, and I think really just a taste of it. But when I got back to my normal life, things really were a bit different. I began to notice that this dissatisfaction, this discontent was beginning to return, but I had a different perspective on it. What I realized now was that where I had blamed this discontent on external circumstances before, I now had real direct evidence that actually, in a sense, this suffering was needless. That there was the potential that existed for a sense of deeper, profound okayness within the storm of life, the storm of life that you really can't control. And I looked around now in my context and the people that I knew, and I saw that basically everyone I knew was also in this same circumstance, that they really were, from my perspective, needlessly suffering. And I saw that this was actually a genuinely curable condition. And when I looked a little more broadly and started poking around, I saw that this is not just me and my friends, but if we look around in the developed world, where people really have the basic things that they need. They're not starving, they don't have war and famine around them, but they actually have a job, they have circumstances that support a quality of life. Even looking at something like stress, it's really an epidemic. 20% of Americans report extreme stress. This is essentially the highest you can rate your level of stress. 69% report physical symptoms of stress. It's gotten so bad it's affected the body. 2/3 of doctors' visits are stress-related ailments. And job stress costs $300 billion annually. And just to put another label on it, looking at it in terms of anxiety and pharmaceuticals, 2007, almost 12% of adults receive some kind of treatment for anxiety and mood disorders. And there's $18.4 billion spent on anxiety medications. Yet, I see this, but at the same time, there is this recognition that there are genuinely already existing tools or paths or pointers or structures that can actually resolve much of this internal conflict. But in that, there is a conflict of sorts. These practices are in many cases thousands of years old. And they really were designed for a very different cultural context. And when I looked at my present life experiences, these were designed for a very different cultural context, and there have been very valiant and really noble efforts that I fully support to try to adapt these ancient tools to a modern context. For example, you see things like mindfulness-based stress reduction. I wish these approaches all the success in the world because I think that they play an important part. But there is a tension that exists there. Because if we look at our modern context, what's happening, if we just watch as an observer, we are increasingly plugged in. We're increasingly inundated with information and content. And what these practices, these ancient practices want is for us to unplug. And so, of course, you see a lot of movements that are supporting unplug, take time, sit on the cushion, put your cell phone, turn it off, don't sleep with it by your bed. It's wonderful. As many people that can do that, I support it. But we're still trying to swim upstream, in a sense. So when I step back from the perspective of an engineer, what I saw was that these traditional tools, as Jamie said, are really technologies. They're human inventions. They are structures that were built by, in a sense, scientists of the mind, by pioneers that were exploring the nature of human experience from a subjective first-person perspective in order to help us to shift our relationship with ourselves and reality. And so, in that sense, the eradication of human suffering isn't a Buddhist thing, or a spiritual thing, or a religious thing at all. It's actually it's an inherent human capacity. But these pioneers of these early traditional methods actually discovered a path, a means to this experience, to this realization, in the same way that you can imagine European explorers on their ships discovering, for example, the Americas. Now, of course, when they first discovered it, there was no knowledge of the existence of that place. And for a long time, the only way to reach that place was by this one means, by boat. But it's not as if the boat created this experience, right? It's just that finally someone had created the means to find this place. But how many people now would take a boat to get to India? Now, some people might, because you may prefer a boat. You may want to go on a cruise. It's totally possible, but there are now other means as well that you can choose from. But similarly, suffering is not Buddhist. Suffering is not religious. Suffering is not spiritual. Suffering is also a human condition. And arguably, it's one of the most detrimental human conditions on the planet. From one perspective, you could actually see it as the root of what we call all of the world's problems. The fear, the hatred, the war, the corroding relationship with our earth. These really stem from, in one sense, this false sense of separateness, this false conflict with a perceived self and the perceived outside world or the perceived other. And this is not something that we need to find these narrow, confined ways of addressing, but this is something that we need to band together as a species, a problem that we need to come together as a human race to solve. And so what I put forth is that in order to be able to address this, we need to take a fresh look at the problem, outside of any preconceived idea of how one should eradicate or solve human suffering, and be willing to consider all possible paths. For example, many Buddhist traditions have something like a bodhisattva vow, which is a commitment to the eradication of human suffering by all means necessary. But by all means necessary really means by all means necessary. And so, with that in mind, what I saw for myself was that there wasn't actually a conflict between science and technology in the spiritual path. It actually was completely the opposite. What I realized was that arguably the most noble and important application of technology and the most important focus for science is the same focus that has been at the heart of Buddhism for thousands of years. This is getting to the very root, the very underlying causes of human, individual, global, and cultural suffering. And so that has really, this way of thinking has really shaped my path. And there are some names for this that you could give. Just throw a few out there. You could call it applied contemplative science, where you see contemplative science already, right? Studying meditators' brains, for example, but then how do we apply that, create new tools from that? Contemplative engineering, consciousness hacking, contemplative technology, transformative technology, essential self technologies. These are all names or terms that are being moved around right now. But actually, this isn't, in essence, a new idea. Actually, I don't even see myself as doing this. When I look around, I actually see that this is already happening. It's a very natural progression, and I almost feel like I'm just kind of riding a wave and going along for the ride. We're seeing institutions around the world with increasing rapidity and excitement adopting and creating new initiatives to understand, for example, the relationship between meditation and the brain and the heart and the body and the biology and the blood chemistry and the DNA. And these are incredibly important and really amazing initiatives, and they stem from a recognition of the importance and power latent within these traditional practices. But one point I want to make is that Here you see some brain scans, for instance, of a meditator. This is not enlightenment. This is not meditation. There does not need to be any claim at all made that somehow consciousness can be reduced to the brain or exist in the brain. You could claim that, and you could argue it, but it's actually irrelevant for what I'm saying here. The only claim that's being made is that this is a map for the underlying terrain, meaning this is a conceptual representation, a symbolic representation, a reflection of the underlying experience. And all it does is it helps us to understand the patterns and the movements and the changes in that underlying experience. But this isn't enlightenment either. This, all of Buddhism, all of spiritual teaching, every religion in the world is also just a map, just a conceptual representation. It's a model pointing towards, ultimately, a direct experience. But they are different in a way. This is quantitative, meaning when we, for example, study the brain or study the biology from a scientific perspective, what we're doing is we're using numbers to represent that underlying phenomenon. And we're using technologies like microscopes or fMRI machines that are basically tools to help us observe reality in a reliable and consistent way. From this perspective, this is a first-person observation. And the result is language, right? Language, pictorial representations, books, spoken word, lectures. That's the way that this first-person experience is recorded and expressed. And they both are particularly suited to different things. This subjective language-based representation is very well suited to describe to people a particular practice. Focus on your breath. Use this type of visualization. It's really, really good at that, right? Now, on the other side, the quantitative is very, very good at helping us to build technology. The better you can quantify, meaning the better you can measure a particular phenomenon, the more effectively you can build a tool to interact with it or intervene. In a sense, if you can quantify it, you can change it. I think in a sense that's true from first-person perspective. If it can be brought into a focused attention or awareness, then all of a sudden it is amenable to that attention or awareness. The same thing is true with science. If all of a sudden we can find true deep correlates of a particular state of meditation, we can then build technologies to help facilitate these deep states of meditation. An example is our understanding of biological sciences have led to, ultimately, the complete eradication of the smallpox virus by the development of vaccines, right? And so the question remains is, can our scientific understanding of the way that contemplative experience manifests lead to the eradication of human suffering? So an example of how this might actually look, I imagine a lot of you, and I think he was here for a lecture series not that long ago, are familiar with Judson Brewer's work. Judson Brewer is a neuroscientist who was at Yale previously. I think he's now at UMass. And he did some really interesting preliminary work looking at the brains of long-term meditators in order to understand how that experience maps over. And what he found were some very interesting patterns in the brain. And so he embarked on a next step which not many people have taken, which is to try to take that knowledge, take that experience, and act upon it. To try to teach novice meditators how to meditate using this machine. And the way he did that was put someone in the machine, they're lying down, they're in this kind of tube, and they're looking up and they see a screen in front of them. That screen shows them a bar graph, and the bar graph essentially is either red or blue. And as this thing moves, it's actually a direct reflection of what's happening in this very small part of the brain specifically correlated to the deep states of meditation that he had measured previously. And so people that had no experience with meditation could now actually watch visually and see their brain going in and out of this state. This is essentially a technology-assisted form of self-awareness. And the result was very interesting. This is 4 trials for a novice meditator. And what you see is that the case where it's red, the person reported, when asked what they were doing, that they were thinking about their breath. Of course, they were asked to notice their breath. But when they described it, they said, I was thinking about my breath. But all of a sudden, on the 4th trial, something changed. When asked what their experience was, they said that now they were focused more on the physical sensation. Instead of thinking about the breath, it was a direct experience of the breath, which is what meditation techniques tend to point towards. And so this technology actually helped to train in a short time this novice meditator to have a deeper experience of meditation. Now, this is not a one-way street, meaning it's not just the West that is adopting these ideas in traditional practices. It's also going the other direction as well. So this is a quote quite a while ago, I think more than a decade ago, from the Dalai Lama. It says, if it was possible to become free of negative emotions by a riskless implementation of an electrode without impairing intelligence and the critical mind, I would be the first patient. This is a picture that I took about 3 days ago at a conference called Wisdom 2.0. Out of curiosity, how many people have heard of this conference? So this is another example of what is actively happening in the world. This was a conference that was sold out at 2,500 people. And it's specifically about bringing together and finding a coexistence of the world which we're seeing, which is increasingly connected, increasingly filled with information, and these contemplative traditions. And in an effort to bring that mindfulness, which is a buzzword that's used a lot in that context, into this world. And so this was just, I couldn't pass this opportunity. So the monk is actually using a sound and light stimulation machine that's actually designed to entrain brainwaves at a certain frequency. So it's a monk actually using one of these technologies that are designed to shift human experience. And if we look into the consumer world, you guys have all probably seen this trend in wearables, right? Where you have devices that track how many steps you take, how much food you ate, they track your blood pressure, they track your heart rate. There's an increasing number of things that are being tracked. And what are these things if not a form of technology-assisted self-awareness? It's a way of knowing ourselves through this relationship with the technology. But the way that they work for the most part is through information. It's conceptual. It's symbolic. You use this thing for a week. At the end of the week, you sit down at your computer, you pull up the screen, and there's a chart or a graph or a pie chart or something like that. And you think about it. You're like, I sure didn't walk enough this week, or I ate too many, whatever. And so it's a very heady kind of process, right? But if you think about the way meditation works, it's generally speaking not a process of thinking about what's happening, but engaging directly in a non-conceptual awareness. And if you think about some of the most important experiences that you've had in your life, some of the most profound or meaningful or memorable experiences, my guess is they weren't about some piece of information. It wasn't a tweet or a Facebook update. It was probably a special moment shared with a loved one, or watching an incredibly beautiful sunset while you were traveling. These are the things. This is the level of feeling, the level of the heart, the level of the body, the level of emotion. These are the things that are really meaningful for our human experience. And so the question is, how can we build technologies to directly guide us and point to that? One of the initiatives that I'm involved in is something called the Transformative Technology Lab, and that's exactly our goal. It's at a university called Sophia University in Palo Alto. The vision of the lab is threefold. So the first part is it's a research and development lab. And so we're looking at building on the science of understanding, as I talked about before, the correlates, the reflections of these deeper experiences. And then on the other hand, it's using that new understanding to build totally new tools, totally new technologies that may ultimately not resemble meditation at all. But they may be very effective and adapted to this modern context to help us realize these deeper experiences. The second part is an incubator, which means that it's a structure to help support commercial endeavors in the space. So we really want to help to bring these things out into the commercial world. Because if you look at the technologies that are most widely distributed, they are commercial products. It's not just to make a bunch of money, it's actually that those are the things that really make it out into the world. And then the third part is to actually try to create this new space of technology, which we're calling transformative technology. So we have a conference called the Transformative Technology Conference, June 6th and 7th of this year. And if you, for example, when I say wearables, everyone knows, or most people know what that means. But if I said wearables 3, 4, or 5 years ago, you'd have no idea what I was talking about. That's a new domain, a new space of technology. And so we're trying to do the same exact thing here. And I'm going to give you some examples of the type of stuff that I've been working on in the context of the lab. One of our focuses is what I call, I should think of a better name, social technology. But the idea is really thinking about how we can use technology in an interpersonal context. Because I think one facet of this, and something that I definitely work on, is the solitary approach. How can I, sit down in meditation, or how can I use this gadget or whatever it might be in order to shift my own experience? Totally great, it's totally important thing to do. But there's also another fact. There's another facet of this as well, which is how can we transform or evolve interpersonally in this shared context as a community, as a global community together. And so I'm really thinking deeply about how technology can facilitate that. And this isn't a new idea. I mean, human beings have been developing every imaginable practice for bringing community and bringing groups together. But I guess there's a question, which is, have we really made positive progress in creating these kinds of true, deep, meaningful social connections? And it's an open question. I don't know. It's probably not black and white. But I think that there are other ways that we haven't been thinking about that technology can facilitate this. Let me have a little bit of water. So there's some really cool research that I ran across. And what it showed was that if you take two people that are in an intimate relationship with each other, and you sit them down, no words are spoken, there's no physical contact, they're just looking at each other, a certain aspect of their heart rhythm will begin to move in synchrony with each other. Their bodies are literally syncing up. And this is a natural reflection of the deep connection that those two people have. And this is actual data from one of the projects I did. You can actually see this happening. You can see here, it almost looks random or chaotic. And you can see here, there is this point at which 3 different people become synchronized. And you can see this wave happening. And you can see the trough and the peaks of the waves all align. And this, I ended up for a while doing exhibit design for a technology museum in San Jose, and I wanted to explore the opposite approach. I wanted to see if you can actually bring or guide people into this rhythmic heart rhythm together, and if that would result in a deeper sense of connection with those people. So it's sort of an experiment. And of course, anything crazy like this, you have to first try at Burning Man. It was amazing. It was really a total success. People really had these profound and deep connections with each other, but beyond that, there was this incredibly refreshing attitude that people had, which was this newfound realization that, wait a minute, technology can actually serve this role? Technology can actually be used to change the way that I feel in a positive way without inundating me with information. And that was one aspect of it that people were just so amazed by. And I can give you a sort of illustration here of how this works. So you can connect, in this case, up to 6 people to special sensors that are measuring the heart. And the sound that you're hearing and the visuals that you see on the screen are all a direct reflection in real time of each individual's heart rhythm and the collective heart rhythm. And no 2 moments of visuals are ever the same, and no 2 moments of the sound are ever the same, just like no 2 moments of this collective group rhythm are ever the same. And by watching this pattern, and by listening to the music, it's actually a pointer. It's a guide to help bring this group into this synchronous experience. And so this is actually what happens on the screen when the group sort of syncs up. It's kind of this exalted, like, ah! So this was one form of it. I just gave, for example, a presentation to a bunch of interesting folks at Nike talking about potential corporate applications, for example, of this, how you could use this in a meeting context. And this is actually what it looks like at the museum on permanent exhibit. Another project is a project called the Heart Cart, which of course also had to be first tested at Burning Man, just to make sure that it's working properly. But it's recently been funded by the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, and they want to build a research version of it in a lab. And the way that this works is a similar type of concept. There is this little pod, which weighed a ton, and my legs were really tired moving it around. And the pod opens up like a clamshell, and 2 people can sit inside. And when they're inside, it's this totally enclosed, pretty beautiful environment. And each person is connected to sensors that measure their heart and measure their breath. And each person can feel the other person's heart vibrating their entire body through a personal subwoofer. Very similar to what you'd feel if you were in the womb or lying on someone's chest, the sort of beating of the heart against your body. And each person can see and hear the other person's breath as sound and light in the space. So you can see this sort of mandala and the light behind it, the kind of halo. As you inhale, the light sort of crescendos. And as you exhale, it goes to darkness. And in the same way, as you inhale, there's this wave that's sort of cresting. And as you exhale, the wave is crashing. And there's no instruction, there's no goal, there's no winning, there's no losing, there's no graphs, there's no charts, there's no beginning, there's no end, there's nothing. What it is a way to facilitate this deepening of this shared group self-awareness of the physiology, of the present moment physical experience, without forcing someone to look at it, but by putting it ambiently into the space. And it's an effort to try to merge and blur the actual boundary between self and other, where I begin and you end. I'm now part of your breath, you're now part of my breath, and we're in this shared space together. And the result was really interesting. Some people would take it, very like gung-ho, super spiritual, like we're gonna eye gaze for like an hour straight without stopping. And that's awesome. People had really profound spiritual experiences in the space, but other people just got in there and they started talking, just connecting with each other. Nothing spiritual about it. But when they left the space, you could see this glow. They were like, oh, we're like best friends now. We gotta hang out. Let's, what's your phone number? So it's thinking about these ways, non-conceptually, of facilitating this deeper sense of connection. And so there's a couple questions that I want to play around with. One is, are these shortcuts? Are we somehow breaking a rule somewhere? Right? Are we like, is there some cosmic law and we're going to offend like some underlying force here that has some other interest in mind? I don't know, but my sense is no. I don't actually believe in the idea of shortcuts. That seems very much tied to a preconceived idea of how this should all work. And I certainly don't know how this should all work, and I suspect that no one else really does either. And so from a perspective of openness, of saying, maybe time is kind of a construct, and maybe awakening can happen in 10 years or 10 seconds, and we don't know why, and we don't know how. From that perspective, then, what you're left with is a notion of skillfulness. Can you hurt people with technology? Of course you can. Is technology dangerous? Of course it is. If you pursue a path like this, do you have to be careful? Should you really look towards the traditional practices and their teachings to try to learn from them and apply them to what you're doing? Of course. Are there ways of doing this more effectively and less effectively? Absolutely. There's no claim here that this is a panacea, that just any technology will automatically be better than any traditional practice. I don't even use any technologies because still to this day, even though there are some emerging on the market, traditional practices are still better, right? But what it is an openness, a recognition that this is all part of a sort of a collective evolutionary process. And these are tools that we can use to our advantage. And so another thing that I want to talk about is context. Right? Technology has a very interesting use case that you don't find with traditional practices. Traditional practices rely on language. That is the technology, that is the vehicle. And the moment you begin describing something, it's already contextualized. You're wearing a robe, it's Buddhist, it's yogic, it's Advaita, it's whatever it is. There's all the baggage that goes along with it. You're calling it meditation. The moment there's this description, the moment there's instruction, immediately it begins to conflict with people's own held concepts and held beliefs. Technology, in some ways, can bypass this. Because what you can do is you can say, check this out, clunk, put something on someone's head, for example, sit them down for 30 minutes, and actually directly guide them or point them towards potentially a very profound experience, right? But nothing is actually totally free of context. So even in the case of technology, even though it can circumvent some of these limitations of language, there are still a million other things that contextualize it. The PR that was used in the advertisements, the way the website looks, the person that put it on your head, the packaging, the industrial design of the object, all of these things contextualize it. But it's more than just the fact that there is contextualization. Contextualization is arguably even more important than the direct experience. Because it's the contextualization which actually is the guiding structure for this social context, this relationship that we engage with in each other. The contextualization, for example, in Buddhism has to do a lot with ethics, with behavior, with language, with things like that, which you have the ability to largely bypass if you're using a technology. And so what I want to point out is something that we all need to be aware of is even if you can find sort of the proverbial enlightenment button or something like that, right, which really does profoundly shift people's experience, you haven't solved the problems that are inherent in this human experience of living together in this social context. We still have to think about human behavior. We still have to think about ethics, rules, and laws, and those things. And they don't go away. And so that is something that we need to keep in mind. Another thing I want to make sure to emphasize, and this is my last point, is that this is not an attack on anything. It's not in opposition to anything. I actually believe that we need as many paths as humanly possible. And every single perspective, every single creator of paths, every single person working towards the eradication of human suffering is doing something important. And whether that comes through a traditional approach, or whether that comes through a technological approach, or a scientific approach, or through dancing, or chanting, or weird types of bubble gum, it doesn't matter. It's a question of what your intention is and what you're pointing towards. And so what I urge everyone to do is to take a step back and have us sort of join together in kind of this mutual support and recognition that the means to the eradication of human suffering may not be known, and there may be many of them. And part of our responsibility is to be open and accepting of those and to try to support as much as we can. So, thank you very much.
For a techno San Fran kind of guy, he's actually MIT, so he's used to this. That's a pretty Buddhist operation you got going there. 108,000 proclivities and 108,000 paths to eradicate them.
Agreed.
And so now we have 108,000 questions for Mikey.
Yes.
So I just want to begin by saying that was one of the more interesting talks that I've heard in a very, very long time.
Thank you. I really...
My appreciation for that.
I appreciate that.
This afternoon woke me up.
Thank you. That's a beautiful comment.
Very provocative in so many ways. With respect to your last point about contextualization,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the context of history and community and culture and world religious traditions and how that is such a richly textured context. And that's part of the appeal to many people, but it's also something that alienates a lot of people as well. And even if one ignores the kind of cutting edge things that you were describing here, one thinks of the nature of mindfulness as a secular phenomenon. I'm not critiquing it, I'm simply observing that that is also on this part of the spectrum in contrast to the larger historical context and cultural context of religious tradition. So it's not really a criticism so much as an observation about what we might lose if we lose touch with vast cultural historical traditions.
Should I comment on that quick
Please,
before you?
yes,
Okay.
yeah,
What comes to me when you say that is my sense of things is that they're rhythmic or cyclical, and that in the process of innovation, there is a period of rejection and a period of reabsorption. And that seems to just be natural and sort of move back and forth and back and forth. So what I could see here in this context of technology, for example, an initial kind of period where it's kind of like, we don't need any of that ancient stuff. And then all of a sudden finding, whoa, we've got all these problems coming up that people are a bunch of enlightened assholes running around, you know, and then it's like, well, how do we solve that problem? And then we realize, wait a minute, that problem is in some ways has been solved for thousands of years. And then a reabsorption of some of those things, but it's kind of like maybe in certain cases you kind of have to learn that lesson the hard way. Yeah, please. Please.
With respect to the notion of shortcuts and sensitivity to that issue, so I'm thinking of hallucinogens and LSD. I'm a product of the '60s.
Yeah.
Didn't do a lot of LSD, thankfully, but it's sort of that idea that we can drop a pill and get somewhere very, very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Rather than 40 years of sitting on the cushion or 80 years of studying Talmud or whatever it is. And one worries a little bit in our culture, American culture, where we're so oriented towards dropping a pill in order to
the quick
solve
fix.
the problem right here and there, rather than dedicating ourselves through effort over a period of time to figure it all out. Again, I'm not necessarily saying one is better than the other.
Yeah, no, totally. It's a great point.
A little bit of a worry about feeding that tendency in American culture that the very, very instantaneously quick fix.
Did you want to respond? Wait.
Forgive me for not asking questions so much as.
No, I mean, you make a great point, but did you have something you wanted to say?
I think probably it was something I was thinking about
Okay,
too, as you
yeah.
were talking, is the difference between happiness and wisdom.
Yeah.
And I think in the United States we look for happiness
Yes.
way before we look for wisdom. And
Undoubtedly.
Buddhists are about both.
Yes, for sure. So, okay, both of those are good things. So I'll start with you. I mean, they're related, but I'll start with yours, this notion of the quick fix. You're totally right. There is this total propensity for us to seek like that, the pill we can take or whatever. Interestingly or paradoxically or whatever, there's this other puritanical idea that we really have to suffer to get there, and it's going to take this long and this many years in the cave and this many hours on retreat or whatever it is. And so those are actually two things that we have like on either shoulder. And I want to go back and re-emphasize what I broadly refer to as skillfulness, right? There will always be cases where people try to find an unskillful shortcut, where they ultimately are not actually being pointed to that genuine thing, right? And there will also always be cases where people basically go in circles, never realizing that they're just circling around what they've always been looking for. And so the goal always for any approach is to try to find the middle path between them. And so to keep in mind the concern that you're saying, and also to keep in mind, to keep an openness that says, actually, there are not necessarily any rules that say how this is supposed to happen. And if we approach it with that openness, we may discover very skillful means that were not what we could have imagined. And to your point, if I confused happiness and wisdom, I wouldn't be giving this talk. Not saying you think that I am, but I wouldn't be giving this talk because all of the approaches that exist right now are all efforts to try to either reduce the amount of unpleasant experience that we're having or increase the amount of pleasant experience that we're having, which from a perspective is the cause of suffering in itself. And so all of the approaches are actually just facilitating or supporting or catalyzing this detrimental human condition that we're all in, right? There are even technology approaches. For example, there was an interesting technology that just got a lot of funding, and it's to treat PTSD. And what it does is it's an implant in the brain that essentially electrically stimulates the emotion centers that have to do with negative emotion. And it basically just shuts off in kind of a brute force way that capacity to feel in that way. Now, could that improve the quality of life for these people that really are suffering and may not have another way out? it very well may be true, right? And so I wouldn't tell someone you shouldn't use that, right? But there's another recognition that that doesn't seem like it's getting to the root of the problem. It seems like it's really a Band-Aid. It seems like it's trying to cover up what really is an expression of the root of the problem. The unpleasant experiences are always trying to communicate to us, to tell us where to look. And it's always a process of looking and looking and looking at the source of those things. And so this technology, one way of saying it, or the vision for it, is not technology that tries to help you get somewhere else, but it's technology that helps you be completely here, is the contrast. Yes?
For one, I just want to say I really enjoyed your talk.
Cool.
I think the methodology is like on point in regards to the way that you're engaging with the tradition without sort of perhaps disrupting its previous goals. And I was curious in the way that it seems that a lot of the technological things that you're looking at really engage with the contemplative aspects of the traditions. And in particular, like a Buddhist focus, like the contemplative and the ethical are inexplicably entwined. And I was wondering if you had anything to say about kind of the way in which some of these technologies might engage with an ethical standpoint.
That's a great question, and I think and that's why I threw in that context slide, because it's an important question. And I think that's the role of community. And I think that always has been, and that always will be. And there are, beyond the contemplative, there are scientific approaches, for example, to understanding compassion, right? Which is a little more tied to the ethical aspect that you're talking about. And so you could imagine that as one aspect of it as well, that we could even begin to understand from this kind of quantitative perspective these aspects of the way in which we relate to each other. And we can perhaps use these tools or technologies to help us gain a deeper self-awareness, to help us see, to help drive us towards a particular desired social construct. But the definition of the goal, meaning what is a desirable way for us to relate to each other, that in a lot of ways is cultural. And so as a culture, we always have to agree upon and define those things. But I think that there could be technological ways of still helping us to realize them or conform to them. Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting when you talked about, you used some interesting examples of kind of feedback relationships, like in the MRI scan, for example, and then the cart.
Oh, the heart cart?
The heart cart.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that if you compare like those two examples, first one in the MRI machine, it's one person who's getting feedback, and they're getting kind of self-awareness of something, some data that's coming from their physiological input. Whereas in the heart cart, it's two people, getting each other's feedback.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just thought that was really interesting.
Cool.
Think about like, is it a lot better to have interpersonal kind of feedback loops like that?
Yeah, it's a cool thing to point out. It feels to me like there's no end to the angles at which we can approach this, and I feel like approaching it from an interpersonal way is really important, and approaching it from a sort of a solitary way is important as well. And I generally speaking, I really believe ultimately the way this will need to work is that there is a perfectly adapted path for each person, because we are all unique and we're all different. And what we're moving towards, if you look at the shape of the technology surrounding us, is it's already moving towards increased customization, right? We're 3D printing objects according to our design. We're we are ultimately probably going to have custom pharmaceuticals designed just for us. We have these wearables that are tracking how we feel and what our heart rate is. And it's all about this increased personalization and customization. And so I think the same will be true ultimately with the path, that each of us will have our own perfect path that suits us. And for some people that may be interpersonal. For some people that may be more solitary. Yeah? Yeah?
Hi. So you refer to EKGs and fMRIs and technologies that can measure heart rates and pathways in the brain. So I'm wondering if there are any new technologies that are measuring new things besides heart rates and pathways in the brain. Are there any new things that we're measuring that allow us to better understand the human physiology?
Yeah, great question. So one kind of bottomless pit of new things to measure is the biology side. And actually, that's something that Nora is working on. She's part of the lab as well. And so it seems like we are constantly discovering new paths and new routes on that front. From a technology, from a things you can measure perspective, I mean, I don't know how sort of techie you want the answer to be, but for example, there's really interesting new brain imaging methods that are coming out that are using optics in new ways, that are using light to image, which is really interesting. You're seeing, let's see. I'm trying to think of what completely new, like uncharted means of measuring I can think of. Because the biggest changes that are happening are that the things that used to cost 6 digits or 5 digits, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to measure, are now costing hundreds of dollars. And so right now, if you look at the big changes that are happening, that seems to be the biggest one. None of the sensors seem all that new. They're just now appearing on your wrist, where they were not before. That seems to be the biggest change. Yeah.
Are there technologies in this emerging field that your lab, that you wouldn't want to see developed, or your lab wouldn't do because of ethical reasons, or that you just think are a bad idea? At least in terms of where you could see it going, you wouldn't want to have us proceed with it.
There are certainly things that exist right now that I wouldn't use. Mainly certain types of brain stimulation. I actually don't have a fundamental problem with stimulation. So there's feedback, which is kind of like biofeedback, neurofeedback. And then there's stimulation, which kind of rubs people the wrong way a little bit more. That's basically like where you put a thing on your head and it runs an electrical current through your brain, or it uses ultrasound, or it uses a magnetic field or something like that. I personally am a little more cautious with those things, but I don't outright dismiss them. But your question is an interesting one. I'm trying to think if there's anything that it's like outright, like wrong. There's nothing that there's nothing that comes to mind. It would be more how something is implemented, Like you could have a type of feedback, for example, that someone could build. For example, there's interesting approaches to feedback that use virtual reality, right, that are very immersive. And I think ultimately that will be one of the most interesting directions for this stuff, where you actually are generating a full immersive environment that's actually guiding someone's own transformation or experience. And I could see you doing a lot of damage with that, really messing with someone's whole conceptual structure if you don't know what you're doing. And so I'm always just cautious to see where are people coming from. What's their intention? What's their background? How much sort of self-awareness and wisdom are they bringing to this? Because, that was something I didn't put in the slides. So one important thing about this is I really believe that what we create is really a reflection of ourselves, right? You're always, in a sense, limited in what you can build and the experience you can facilitate by the depth of your own experience. And so I hold that onto myself for sure, and I see that around me as well. And so for me, that's a big factor. So I guess the answer to your question might be depending on who is creating it, I may be cautious. Yes?
To that point, are you conferring it all in the lab with people who have experienced very high planes of this other consciousness and have worked through things that, when you experience, can be very jarring and you don't even know how to re-enter former consciousness fully? So how in touch are you with those levels of practitioners?
Great question. Very, very lucky that one of the co-founders of the lab, his name is Jeffrey Martin, he spent the last 10 years in a research effort to try to explore what he calls persistent non-symbolic experience, which is really an effort to put an academic term to awakening or enlightenment. And so over the last 8 or 10 years, he has amassed a huge community of what have been research subjects, but have also now built just a community around us of really amazing, awakened human beings that I can just kind of call up or are hanging out at the lab. And so we're very lucky that actually we have people like that all around us all the time. And so it's pretty cool. Yeah.
So if what I'm seeking is wisdom and compassion,
Yeah.
how is using technology going to assist me in that? I was very interested in the gentleman's comment because I can relate to the 60s. Sex, drug, and rock and roll was a lot of fun, but then we still ended up having to deal with whether or not we were becoming better people.
Yeah. So for you, okay, it's not a snarky answer, but for you it may not. Meaning,
No, I know.
okay, okay. So then to answer more broadly,
But I'm still curious.
Yeah.
Would there be something that I'm missing?
Yeah. So I don't necessarily have an answer to that question. The way that I would respond to it is I would say that we can already observe that there are existing tools or structures that we use to point us in that direction. And certainly, for example, let's say someone is writing a book about wisdom, right? That person is going to put every effort possible into how they structure their sentences, into how they order their reasoning and their argument to maximize the clarity of that book. Ultimately, what they're doing is they're trying to really make the technology, this book, as efficient and effective as possible. And in the same way, what I'm kind of asking is, let's take a step back and imagine books and verbal teachings perhaps aren't the only way to do this. There may be ways that we have not considered, that we have not thought of. So for example, specifically with regard to compassion, there is now, for example, at Stanford, has a program called Siegel, and it's a specific focus on a scientific understanding of compassion, how compassion manifests in the brain, in the body. And so you can imagine that, let's say we really were able to measure compassion really directly in the brain. Not that it necessarily just exists in the brain, but that we can measure it in the brain. That then could actually be a tool to point people or to help people become aware of not just their level of compassion, but the route or the means through which they could come to that deeper feeling or that deeper experience of compassion. And that may be combined with a compassion-based meditation. Compassion-based meditation with something you put on your head and a soundscape you're listening to or lights or something that are actually strengthening that process in the way that a really intuitive meditation instructor might. Like, oh no, you're going down an unskillful path now. Come back, route yourself this way. And so, that's just off the cuff, like one way you might see something like that evolve.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I like that.
Cool. Yes.
So I'm curious. First of all, again, to echo what everybody else has said, it's been great to hear through your talk.
Cool. Thank you.
Especially appreciate you saying that from a neurobiological
Right.
But I'm curious, for some of these people who are in your heart plan or
The heart cart, yeah.
heart cart, did you do any follow-up to see how it lasted? What were the lasting effects?
Yeah, it's a great question. That project has not been yet brought into a formal research context. So it was more like I've brought it to events and conferences and this kind of thing. And the research portion of it will probably be beginning in the next 6 months. So I'll have a better response then. Yeah. Hey, only this side of the room is the question side. Unless I'm ignoring people over here.
Have you thought about how any of these technologies might be implemented medicinally or therapeutically? For example, if someone had a relative who was dying and you synced their hearts together.
Totally. I think that type of interpersonal context, for example, even a therapist and a client, right? Or two people dealing with a really traumatic kind of thing together. I think that those are like the golden prime examples of how that could be used. And I haven't had the opportunity to test this out in that context, but that's what I hope for, that it could facilitate that kind of thing. Cool. Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah.
I was wondering if you have any concerns about the potential corporate implementation of these technologies, if the goal is to make money rather than to increase awareness and compassion.
Yeah. I don't think that it has to be either or, meaning I don't actually think that it's wrong to make money. And I don't think it's wrong to profit off of these technologies, just like I don't think it's wrong personally for meditation instructors to be able to actually make a living teaching meditation. And so that's one answer. Another answer is that it is certainly possible for anything to be corrupted, and likely, and almost certain, right? And so there will be, I can almost guarantee you, like the Coca-Cola wisdom drink or whatever, that will be trying to enlighten you or something, and it will just basically be, a misguided attempt to make money. So that will happen. And so I guess my response to that is all of these things are double-edged swords, meaning you can cut both ways with any of it, and all you can really do is sharpen your edge as sharp as you can. And so I'll just keep doing what I'm doing, and other people may do crazy stuff.
Mikey,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Cool.
I want to end, though, on a more positive note than
Okay.
the corporate hijack shit.
Okay.
Because it is a real question. And
Yeah.
the Dalai Lama, as probably many of you know, has come into some bad press lately because of his pimping out meditation in Silicon Valley.
Mm.
It's like, and we've had this before with the Japan Inc. and the Zen samurai approach, right? These people who have been studying Zen Buddhism in order to be better military warriors or better corporate samurai, whatever. So technology, it's a tool, right?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I see it going all kinds of different ways, but I'm up to effing mystic.
Yeah.
That's my storyline, and so can you end us on an optimistic? We're going to go with the tools that are going to make everybody happier and cooler, and we're not going to be selling Coca-Cola, Pepsi drinks for corporate enhancement and tool making.
Well, here's the optimistic note or whatever. The amazing thing is that it will, I'll be there. I can't deny that. But the incredible thing is that when I look around, this is what I'm talking about is really happening. And so what's really cool is that in our lifetimes, I really believe that we will begin to see the true proliferation of effective means for reducing human suffering and deep awakening and realization spread throughout society. Whether it's through traditional practices, but I think actually the technological approaches are the ones that will catch fire, because those are the ones that will be readily adopted. And so we actually, all of us in this room, stand with this potential to see a widespread human awakening, I think never before seen in our species. So let us all, yeah. Cool.
Yeah, everybody, thank you. You know, what fun I get to have doing this kind of shit, right? This is like totally over the top. And Mikey is the second in this group of speakers of optimistic spirits who are moving us forward into the new universe. Robin Arnault,
Yeah.
who's, I believe, house sitting at your house right now.
He is now taking care of my cats.
Hopefully
Yeah.
clothed. That's
Probably
the
not.
story. So he's going to be speaking on March 31st. Robin.
He's a great speaker, by the way. I just had him speak at a consciousness hacking event 3 days ago. Awesome guy.
You know, and this is from San Francisco to here. We don't know how far this guy has traveled. It's complicated. And so Robin will be here on March 26th. He's an audio engineer. He has done some things that I can't go near.
I'll introduce him. So Robin comes from the gaming world, and he has a purple mohawk, and he has
occasionally a purple mohawk.
You don't know what he's going to have. You don't know what he's going to have. But what he's created is one of the most interesting examples of this technology that I've seen. It's virtual reality goggles that you put on, and you essentially sing into this experience. And the experience sings back to you in harmony and creates this completely immersive vortex of visualizations that completely engulfs you based on your vocals and in harmony with your vocals. And it's really a totally alternative approach to how you can engage someone non-conceptually in like a deep state, a deep trance. But it really works, and it's really cool, and it's very new and very original. And he has some cool thoughts about it, so check it out.
And before that, he did an entirely opposite adventure, I recall. His Deep Sea,
Yep.
which was the freakiest, apparently, game ever produced on the market. You immersed yourself with a fake mask, and you went into a world. I don't know.
I think he stopped doing it after he showed it to someone and they fainted while they were using it. So that was his first, and then he's like, I think I want to do things that are more positive. But that knowledge of how you can really get to people can be used in different ways.
Where he went with that app, it was impressive.
Yeah.
You know, and scared him into enlightenment. And then after that, we have Ariel Garten and famously named Michael Apollo, who are coming. I don't know if any of you have seen, I don't think it was in your presentation, but among the wearables. So when I was out at the Buddhist Geek Conference last October, I guess it was, in Boulder, and I was getting onto the elevator and I heard somebody say, get me on the phone. I want every wearable that's in America, and I want them tomorrow. You know. So wearables, this fit approach.
That wasn't me that said that.
It was scary. It was impressive because what it means is that Mikey talked about the ethical dimensions. I'm sorry, I'm rambling here, but it's all right. We can converse.
After these guys, yeah.
He talked about the ethical adventures involved in this, and I think that the community aspect is one of the most important of the ethical dimensions that we can bring to this. It's not often part of the mindfulness world. If you go to IMS, you sit with 100 people. You're totally by yourself. There's no instruction. There's no nothing, right? And where's the community, and who's bringing us these ethical kind of standards? So the next adventure from the makers of Muse. Wearable, so Mike was talking about the Fitbit, the kind of things that you put on your hand and they measure directly to your Bluetooth-enabled device and give you the metrics. He had the slide up there. Well, another one of the more recent ones is EEG metrics, EEG wearables, right? So not only do you know your heartbeat and your respiration rate and the amount of calories you're having, but you also have EEG feedback.
I'll finish this one. So Muse has created what I think is one of the best examples of this technology that's available right now on the mass consumer space. You should go out and buy one. They don't call it.
If you're a student, we have them. We bought 6 of them. You
Yep.
can have them. We have them.
Worth checking out. It's the first technology that really, in a deep way, can directly guide meditation. And they don't call it meditation, they call it the calming app because they're trying to make this a mass market thing. But behind the scenes, they have 8 full-time neuroscientists working on really, really sophisticated ways of monitoring the brain and help guiding you through direct feedback. You're listening to headphones while you use it into a deep state of meditation. My mom is actually using one. She never meditated in her whole life.
In full disclosure,
Yeah.
Mikey's not part of this operation. Mikey's part of NeuroSky, which is a open source application. And we have 3 of those here at Smith also. And one of their applications is flip a dump truck with your mind. And so, but in any case, these are all applications, these are all technology, I'm going to say interventions that to me they feel like tantric Buddhism. They don't feel too different to me. And so we have all of that stuff. And so for all of you students, we have those things, and we have them all over we buy them. We spend Smith College money on technology shit, right? And then finally, if that's not enough, so along with Ariel Garten, the CEO of Muse, and Michael Apollo, who has a little bit of a Nevada, what do you call it, Consumer Electronics Show app, where he demonstrates how to pour a beer with your mind. So we got that going. And then to wind it up, since we're talking about psilocybin and drugs and everybody wants to do that, at the end we have another ethicist. We had an ethicist at the very beginning of this, James Hughes, who talked about ethics and transhumanism and those kinds of things. And at the far end, later down the line, we have another another ethics guy, Andrew Fenton, who is going to come and talk to us about the ethics of pharmaceutical cognitive enhancement. So, we continue on. Thanks, Mike.
Cool.
Mikey.